A memory palace consists of three principal elements: a space, mnemonics, and a story. Creating each of these elements is a skill and takes practice. To develop strong, long-term retention, it's important to master all three skills. It can be difficult for people to grasp the importance of creating stories to connect mnemonics together. It can also be difficult to understand how best to go about creating stories specifically for the purpose of memory. When you finish creating mnemonics and organizing them in space, you often end up with rooms filled with completely random images. What these mnemonics represent or help you remember might tie them together, but as objects themselves, these mnemonics are often completely disconnected. A story links them together and creates a logic for the space. Let's look at an example. Here we have 6 mnemonics in a space: an otter, an ibex, an elephant, yams, a pot of tea, and a no mask. These are essentially 6 random objects. They represent present tense endings in the Italian language. The otter is an O ending, the ibex is an I ending, the elephant an E ending, the yams a yamo ending, the tea a te ending, and the no mask a no ending. While these mnemonic images may be more memorable and experiential on their own than the textual verbal endings they represent, they are just random objects in space, and so will be easily confused over time, especially when you create mnemonics for the rest of the verbal system of Italian, which is quite large. To create a story to help us remember these mnemonics, we need to follow some key principles. 1. Use the unique qualities of the mnemonics themselves. So for example, if you use an ice cream as a mnemonic, it's cold, delicious, and it melts. If you have a fire, it's hot, it smokes, and it consumes things. Number 2. If order is important, introduce the mnemonics in the story in the same order as they are presented in the space. If order is not important, you can bounce around. 3. Make the story ridiculous and fun, but logical. It can be a dreamlike logic, but stepping from one mnemonic to another in the story has to make sense. 4. Use the story to add extra information. For example, if you're learning vocabulary, you can use the story to help you remember the meanings or spellings of words. Let's start by looking at how not to do this. Here's a story to connect the elements. There once was an otter, an ibex, and an elephant who were all friends. They drank tea, ate yams, and watched a no play together. This is a typical first attempt for someone just getting started creating memory stories. What's wrong with it? The problem is it's both forgettable and confusable. There's nothing in the story to anchor the mnemonics. In other words, you could easily swap out these mnemonics for other ones. For example, we could just as easily have 3 other random animals in place of the otter, the ibex, and the elephant. And because the elements are not presented in any real narrative sequence, we could easily end up confusing the order, so that even if we remember the mnemonics, we put the ibex first instead of the otter, or something like that. Here's a better story with the same mnemonics. One day, an otter was swimming in the river when he saw an ibex coming to the water to drink. The banks of the river were very steep, and the ibex could not reach the water. Unlike other ibexes, this one was afraid of climbing. Taking pity on the ibex, the otter asked his friend the elephant to use her long trunk to reach the water and pull some out for the ibex. A few days later, the ibex invited the otter and the elephant round to his house, where he served yams he had dug with his pointed hooves, and afterwards, sweet tea he made with the water given to him by the elephant. After they had refreshed themselves, the ibex entertained his guests by performing a no play. This is better not just because it's longer and more detailed. The details support and point to the mnemonics. Otters swim. The ibex is normally excellent at climbing cliff faces. Elephants are massive and have long trunks. The story uses unique qualities of each mnemonic and ties them together with a logic, keeping them in sequence. If you find that you can swap one mnemonic for another without affecting the story, then you probably need to change the story itself. In general, there are 2 paths to creating a memory story. First, you can have the mnemonics themselves interact with each other, as we have in this example. The otter sees the ibex, then calls to the elephant, etc. The other option is to introduce a protagonist who interacts with the mnemonics. Here's an example of a protagonist-led story with the same images. As before, we'll start with an example of how not to create a good memory story. A little girl traveled to Italy, and while she was walking around Rome, she met an otter, an ibex, and an elephant. They gave her a yam. She had tea and watched a no play. Here again, the mnemonics could be easily swapped out for other images. The sequence is not fixed in the story, and the story itself is forgettable. Here's an example of a better protagonist-led story with the same images. A little girl traveled to Rome and saw an otter swimming in the Trevi fountain. She tried to call out to the otter to get out of the fountain, because if he's caught, he'll be in a lot of trouble. She spoke to an ibex next to her and asked him to help. He climbed over the statue, picking his way carefully, and pulled the otter out. The police saw them, though, and started moving towards them. An elephant then scooped up water from the fountain with her trunk and sprayed the police to distract them. The girl then ran away with the 3 animals. After they were sure they weren't being followed, they realized how hungry they were. To say thank you for saving him, the otter treated them to lunch. They ate gnocchi made from yams and had some tea-flavored gelato for dessert. The ibex then invited them to a no play he was performing that night at the Colosseum. Once you understand the importance of creating mnemonic stories for long-term retention, you can practice following the principles we've discussed and see what works for you. If you forget something, that's an important sign. Why did you forget it? Try changing that part of the story. In time, you'll get a sense for what works and what doesn't, and better understand how narrative supports the other 2 components of a memory palace, the space and the mnemonics. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and check out Linguisticator.com for our courses in memory and languages. Also check the description below for information on Monks VR, our software for building memory palaces in 3D and virtual reality.